Ethan Carter sat alone in his dimly lit office, the glow of his computer screen casting shadows across the cluttered desk. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, a testament to the countless hours he spent buried in research. Ethan was an astrophysicist, one of the brightest minds at the United Earth Council's Science Division. But tonight, he wasn't working on anything official. His fingers moved quickly over the keyboard as he sifted through layers of encrypted files he had stumbled upon by accident. It all started earlier that week when Ethan was reviewing data from a routine satellite scan. Hidden within the numbers and charts, he noticed something strange, a series of codes that didn't match any known encryption used by Earth systems. At first, he thought it might be a glitch or some leftover test data, but curiosity got the better of him. He spent days decoding it, piecing together fragments until he uncovered something shocking. These files weren't about space exploration or scientific discoveries. They were about humanity's place, or lack thereof, in the galaxy. The documents hinted at a secret agreement, something called the Galactic Accord. According to the fragmented text, humans were forbidden from participating in galactic wars. For centuries, this truth had been hidden from the public. Officially, Earth claimed neutrality, saying it preferred peace over conflict. But these files suggested there was more to the story, something darker, something no one dared to speak aloud. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His mind raced with questions. Why would humanity be banned from galactic wars? What made them so different from other species? And why keep it a secret? He knew he couldn't figure this out alone. He needed someone he could trust, someone who wouldn't dismiss his findings as paranoia. That's when he thought of Mia Lopes. Mia was his childhood friend and fellow scientist. She worked in the same building, though their departments rarely crossed paths. Unlike Ethan, Mia had always been practical, preferring hard facts over wild theories. Still, she had a sharp mind and an open heart, qualities that made her perfect for this kind of puzzle. Ethan grabbed his coat and headed down the hallway to Mia's lab. When he walked in, she was bent over a microscope, her dark hair tied back in a messy bun. She looked up, surprised to see him. "Ethan, what are you doing here? It's late. I need your help," he said without preamble. He pulled up a chair and opened his laptop, showing her the decoded files. As Mia read through the information, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. This can't be real," she muttered. "It is," Ethan replied firmly. "I don't know what it means yet, but we have to find out. This changes everything." Mia hesitated. She wanted to argue, to tell Ethan he was jumping to conclusions, but deep down, she felt the same spark of curiosity that drove him. "All right," she finally said, "but if we're going to do this, we need to be careful. If this is true, we're messing with something bigger than either of us." As they began discussing their next steps, neither of them noticed the small security camera mounted in the corner of the room. Somewhere far away, someone was watching and waiting. Ethan and Mia spent the next few days diving deeper into the encrypted files, their excitement growing with each new discovery. They worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and determination. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the Galactic Accord wasn't just a simple agreement. It was a rule enforced by powerful forces. But there were still gaps in the information, pieces of the puzzle missing. It felt like trying to solve a jigsaw with half the pieces lost. One evening, as they were packing up to leave, a sudden knock on the door startled them both. Ethan opened it cautiously, only to find a man standing in the hallway. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with short brown hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were worn, and he carried an old duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He introduced himself as Daniel Harper, though his tone suggested he already knew who they were. "I've been looking for you too," Daniel said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His voice was calm but firm, carrying a weight that made Ethan and Mia exchange uneasy glances. "I heard about your little project. You're poking around where you shouldn't." Mia crossed her arms. Who are you? And how do you know what we're working on? Daniel set his bag down and pulled out a small device, placing it on the table. It looked like a portable hard drive, its surface scratched and battered. This belonged to my squad. We were sent on a mission 5 years ago, supposedly to explore uncharted space. Instead, we ended up in the middle of a war zone. Most of my team didn't make it back. I've been trying to figure out why ever since. Ethan frowned. What does this have to do with us? Everything, Daniel replied. Your files are just the tip of the iceberg. The Council doesn't want anyone digging into this. Trust me, I've seen what happens when people ask too many questions. He paused, his eyes narrowing. But if you're serious about finding answers, I can help. I've got access to classified military logs that might fill in some of the blanks. Mia glanced at Ethan, unsure whether to trust this stranger. There was something about Daniel's demeanor, his intensity, that made her hesitate. Still, she couldn't deny the potential value of his offer. If what he said was true, they needed all the help they could get. What's in it for you? Ethan asked, his tone skeptical. Why would you risk your neck helping us? Daniel shrugged. Let's just say I owe it to the friends I lost. Besides, I'm tired of running. Maybe it's time someone exposed the truth. After a long silence, Ethan nodded slowly. All right, but if you're lying to us. I'm not, Daniel interrupted. And you'll see that soon enough. Over the next hour, Daniel explained how the Council had covered up several incidents involving humanity's failed attempts to engage with alien civilizations. Each attempt had ended disastrously, often resulting in violence or betrayal. According to Daniel, these failures weren't isolated. They were part of a pattern, proof that humanity wasn't ready to play nice with others. As they talked, Ethan noticed Daniel glance nervously at the door every few minutes. At first, he thought it was paranoia, but then he heard it, a faint buzzing sound coming from the hallway. Someone was outside, listening. We need to go. Now, Daniel whispered urgently, grabbing his bag. Without waiting for a response, he ushered Ethan and Mia toward the fire exit at the back of the building. As they slipped out into the cold night air, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, and that their search for answers had only just begun. The three of them, Ethan, Mia, and Daniel, moved quickly through the dark streets, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. The cold night air bit at their faces, but none of them spoke until they were several blocks away from the building. Even then, they stayed quiet, glancing over their shoulders every few seconds to make sure no one was following. Finally, Daniel stopped in front of an old beat-up truck parked near the edge of town. He unlocked it with a small handheld device and motioned for Ethan and Mia to get inside. We can't stay in one place for too long, he said as he started the engine. If whoever was outside heard us talking, they'll be looking for us. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, his mind racing. Do you think it's the Council? Are they watching us already? It's possible, Daniel replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. But we won't know for sure until we figure out how deep this goes. For now, we need to lay low and find somewhere safe to keep working. They drove for hours, heading away from the city and into the countryside. The roads grew quieter, the lights of civilization fading behind them. Eventually, Daniel pulled off onto a dirt path that led to an abandoned space station orbiting Saturn. It had been decommissioned years ago, left to rot after newer, more advanced stations were built. Few people even remembered it existed, which made it the perfect hiding spot. When they arrived, the station looked exactly as Daniel described: rusted metal walls, broken windows, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. But despite its rundown appearance, the station still had power, barely. Daniel flipped a series of switches, and dim lights flickered to life, revealing rows of empty corridors and forgotten equipment. This place has been my base for months, Daniel explained as he led them deeper inside. I've been using it to store whatever evidence I could gather. If we're lucky, we'll find something here that connects to your files. Mia raised an eyebrow. You mean you didn't bring all the answers with you? Daniel smirked. Not even close. But I do have a lead. He walked over to a locked cabinet and opened it with a key from his pocket. Inside was a strange object, a shard of crystal about the size of a human hand. Its surface shimmered faintly, reflecting the weak light in the room. What is that? Ethan asked, leaning closer to examine it. It's alien tech, Daniel said. I found it during my last mission. At first, I thought it was just junk, but when I tried to analyze it, I realized it wasn't like anything we've seen before. It doesn't belong to any known species, or at least, not one we've encountered officially. Mia reached out cautiously, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the crystal. As soon as she touched it, the shard lit up, glowing brightly. Startled, she pulled her hand back, but the glow remained steady, casting eerie shadows across the room. Careful, Daniel warned, stepping forward. I don't know what it does, but it reacts to touch. Ethan stared at the crystal, his curiosity outweighing his caution. Maybe it's a clue. Something left behind by whoever created the Galactic Accord. Daniel nodded. That's what I've been thinking. Problem is, I haven't been able to activate it fully. Maybe together, we can figure it out. For the next few hours, the three of them worked tirelessly, connecting the crystal to various pieces of equipment Daniel had salvaged from the station. Slowly, they began to understand how it functioned. When they finally managed to project an image from the crystal, they gasped in awe. Hovering above the table was a holographic scene, a battlefield filled with ships and soldiers from countless species. None of them looked human. The sight was both mesmerizing and unsettling, a reminder of the wars humanity had been excluded from. But there was something else, too. Embedded within the projection were symbols, written in a language none of them recognized. Ethan grabbed a notebook and began sketching the symbols, hoping to translate them later. As they studied the hologram, Mia broke the silence. This changes everything. We're not just banned because we're weak or unprepared. There's something bigger going on here. Daniel nodded grimly. Whatever it is, we're running out of time to find out. Back on Earth, news of Ethan and Mia's investigation spread faster than they could have imagined. Someone had tipped off the United Earth Council, and it didn't take long for the higher-ups to realize the potential threat. Rachel Monroe, a senior council member known for her sharp instincts and ruthless efficiency, called an emergency meeting with her advisors. The room was tense as she paced back and forth, her heels clicking against the polished floor. We can't let this get out, Rachel said, her voice cold and steady. If the public learns about the Galactic Accord, or worse, humanity's role in being excluded, it could destabilize everything we've worked for. One of her advisors, a nervous-looking man named Harold, cleared his throat. But what do you propose we do? Carter and Lopes are already digging too deep, and now there's Harper involved. He's unpredictable. Rachel stopped pacing and turned to face them, her expression unreadable. Then we neutralize the problem. Send operatives to intercept them before they uncover anything concrete. Make sure no evidence survives. Harold hesitated. And if they resist? Rachel's lips curled into a faint smile, but it held no warmth. They won't be given the chance. Meanwhile, across the council chambers, Jacob Lee sat quietly at his desk, reviewing documents. Unlike Rachel, Jacob wasn't a fan of secrecy or manipulation. He believed in transparency and fairness, values that often put him at odds with the more aggressive members of the council. When he overheard snippets of Rachel's plan, his stomach sank. He knew Ethan and Mia personally. They were good people, driven by curiosity rather than malice. To silence them would be wrong. Jacob wrestled with his conscience late into the night. Finally, he made up his mind. Using secure channels, he sent an anonymous message to Ethan's personal communicator. You're being watched. Leave Earth immediately. Trust no one. The next morning, Ethan received the warning just as the group was preparing to leave the abandoned space station. He read the message aloud to Mia and Daniel, his voice tinged with urgency. "It has to be someone on the inside," he said. "Someone who knows what's happening." Mia frowned. "Do you think it's real? What if it's a trap?" "It doesn't matter," Daniel cut in. "Even if it is, staying here isn't an option. If the council sends agents after us, we're sitting ducks." Ethan nodded reluctantly. "He's right. We need to move. Now." As they packed their equipment, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Whoever had sent the message clearly risked a lot to help them. But why? And how much did this person know? These questions swirled in his mind as they boarded their ship, a small but functional vessel Daniel had hidden nearby for emergencies. Once aboard, Daniel plotted a course away from Saturn, aiming for the outer edges of the solar system, where they'd be harder to track. As the engines roared to life, Mia glanced out the window, watching the station grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "To find answers," Daniel replied, his jaw set firmly. "There's someone I trust who might be able to help us. A smuggler named Grace Bennett. She owes me a favor, and she knows how to stay off the grid." Ethan looked skeptical. "A smuggler? Are you sure we can trust her?" Daniel smirked. "Trust isn't really part of the deal with Grace. But she's smart, resourceful, and hates the council almost as much as I do. That makes her useful." For the next several hours, they traveled in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of what they were doing, and the risks they were taking, was beginning to sink in. They weren't just chasing secrets anymore. They were fugitives, hunted by the very organization they once served. Unbeknownst to them, however, Rachel Monroe hadn't given up so easily. Her operatives were already closing in, tracking their movements through subtle signals emitted by the crystal shard. Somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, a dangerous game of cat and mouse was about to begin. The journey to meet Grace Bennett was tense and exhausting. Ethan, Mia, and Daniel barely spoke as the ship drifted further away from Earth, heading toward a remote asteroid belt where Grace supposedly operated. The crystal shard sat securely in a padded case, its faint glow pulsing occasionally like a heartbeat. None of them could shake the feeling that they were being followed, though they had no proof, just a gnawing sense of unease. When they finally arrived at the designated coordinates, they found themselves staring at a battered but functional freighter docked inside a hollowed-out asteroid. The ship's name, the Lucky Break, was painted in faded letters across its hull. As their vessel approached, a voice crackled over the comm system. "State your business," it said sharply. "It's Daniel Harper," Daniel replied. "Grace, it's me. I need your help." There was a long pause before the voice responded. "Harper, you've got some nerve showing up here after all this time. What do you want?" "I'll explain when we're on board," Daniel said firmly. "Just let us dock." After another moment of hesitation, the freighter's docking bay opened, allowing them entry. As they stepped onto the ship, they were greeted by a tall woman with short blonde hair and sharp green eyes. She wore a leather jacket patched together from scraps, and her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. This was Grace Bennett. "Daniel," she said coolly, eyeing the group, "you look like trouble. And who are these people?" "This is Ethan and Mia," Daniel said quickly. "They're scientists. We're working on something important, something dangerous." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous how?" Before Daniel could answer, Ethan stepped forward. "We uncovered information about why humanity isn't allowed to participate in galactic wars. Someone doesn't want us to know the truth. And now we're running out of options." Grace studied him for a moment, then glanced at the case in Ethan's hand. "That wouldn't happen to be alien tech, would it?" Ethan nodded. "It's part of what we're trying to figure out." Grace sighed and shook her head. "Great, just great. Look, I don't care about your little science project, but if Daniel vouches for you, fine. You can stay for now, but don't make me regret it. With that, she led them deeper into the ship, explaining that they'd need to lay low until things cooled down. Her crew consisted of a handful of rough-looking individuals who eyed the newcomers suspiciously but kept their distance. Grace gave them a small cabin to share and promised to keep the ship moving to avoid detection. Over the next few days, tensions ran high. Ethan and Mia worked tirelessly to analyze the crystal shard, hoping to unlock more of its secrets. Meanwhile, Daniel spent most of his time talking strategy with Grace. He knew they couldn't hide forever. They needed a plan. One evening, while everyone else was asleep, Mia joined Grace in the cockpit. The smuggler was sipping coffee and staring out at the endless expanse of stars. "Can't sleep?" Grace asked without looking up. Mia hesitated. I wanted to ask you something." Grace smirked. "Shoot. What made you hate the council so much?" Grace's expression darkened. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath. "Let's just say they destroyed my family. My parents were farmers on a colony world. When the council decided they needed that land for mining operations, they forced everyone out. People lost everything: homes, livelihoods, lives. I was lucky to escape." Mia nodded slowly, understanding dawning on her face. "So you fight back however you can." "Exactly," Grace said. "And if helping you means sticking it to them again, I'm all for it. But don't expect me to hold your hand if things go south." As Mia returned to the cabin, she realized Grace wasn't just a smuggler. She was someone who understood loss and betrayal, just like the rest of them. Maybe that was why Daniel trusted her. Later that night, Ethan woke suddenly, his heart pounding. Something felt off. He glanced around the dark cabin and noticed the faint hum of the engines had changed. They weren't alone anymore. Ethan's instincts were right. The faint hum of the engines wasn't the only thing that had changed. As he crept out of the cabin, he noticed flashing lights on the ship's control panel, warning signals indicating multiple vessels approaching fast. Grace was already in the cockpit, her hands moving quickly over the controls. "We've got company," she said sharply, glancing at Ethan as he entered. 3 ships, maybe more. They're scanning us." Daniel and Mia rushed in moments later, their faces pale with worry. "Who are they?" Maya asked, gripping the back of a chair for support. "Could be bounty hunters," Grace muttered, "or council agents. Either way, we're not sticking around to find out." She flipped switches and pushed levers, bringing the freighter to life. The ship shuddered as it broke away from its hiding spot in the asteroid belt. Behind them, the pursuing ships followed, their engines glowing like angry eyes in the darkness. "They're gaining on us," Daniel shouted, pointing at the radar screen. Grace didn't respond. Her focus was absolute as she maneuvered the ship through narrow gaps between asteroids, using the jagged rocks as cover. The others held on tightly, bracing themselves against the violent jerks and turns. For several nerve-wracking minutes, it seemed like they might lose their pursuers. But then, one of the enemy ships fired a warning shot, narrowly missing their tail. "They're serious," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "They'll destroy us if they have to." Grace gritted her teeth. "Not if I can help it." She slammed her fist on a red button labeled EMRG and Sui thrust. The ship lurched forward with sudden speed, leaving the attackers momentarily behind. But it wasn't enough. They were still too close. "We need a distraction," Daniel said suddenly. "Something to slow them down." Grace glanced at him, then nodded. "There's an old trick I learned. We release decoy drones. They'll mimic our signal and draw them off course. But someone has to go outside and deploy them manually." "I'll do it," Daniel volunteered without hesitation. Before anyone could argue, he grabbed a spacesuit and headed for the airlock. Mia watched him go, her heart racing. "Be careful," she whispered under her breath. Outside, Daniel floated silently in the void of space, attaching the drones to the hull of the ship. His movements were slow and deliberate, every second feeling like an eternity. Back inside, Grace kept the ship steady while Ethan and Mia monitored the radar, calling out updates. 2 drones deployed, Ethan said into the comm system. That should do it. Good, Grace replied. Now get back here before those ships realize what's happening. Just as Daniel finished his task, the decoys activated, emitting false signals that confused the enemy ships. One by one, they turned their attention to the fake targets, giving Grace the opening she needed. With a final burst of speed, she guided the freighter out of range. When Daniel finally re-entered the ship, everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. That was too close, Maya said, shaking her head. But their victory was short-lived. As they emerged from the asteroid belt, they stumbled upon something unexpected. A derelict alien vessel drifting silently in space. Its surface was scorched and battered, clearly the result of some kind of attack. Strange symbols etched into its metallic skin glowed faintly, matching the ones embedded in the crystal shard. What is this place? Ethan asked, staring at the ghostly ship through the viewport. Grace frowned. Looks like trouble. We should keep moving. No, Ethan insisted. This could be connected to everything we've been searching for. We have to check it out. After a brief debate, they agreed to board the alien vessel. Inside, they found evidence of a desperate evacuation, abandoned equipment, scattered belongings, and signs of struggle. But most shocking of all were the survivors. A group of aliens huddled together in what appeared to be a makeshift shelter. They called themselves the Valens, refugees from a war-torn civilization. Through broken communication devices and gestures, the Valens explained that humanity had been excluded from galactic affairs because of its violent tendencies. According to them, early attempts to involve humans in interstellar alliances ended in disaster, destabilizing entire star systems. The Galactic Accord was created to protect weaker species, including the Valens, from such chaos. As Ethan listened, he realized the truth was far more complicated than he'd imagined. Humanity wasn't just banned, it was feared. The Valens were a frail-looking species, their thin bodies covered in shimmering scales that reflected the dim light of the derelict ship. They spoke in soft, melodic tones, their language translated imperfectly by an old device they carried with them. Despite the barriers, Ethan, Mia, and Daniel listened intently as the aliens recounted fragments of humanity's troubled history in the galaxy. One of the Valens, taller than the others, and wearing what seemed to be a ceremonial robe, stepped forward. Through the translator, he explained how humans had once been given a chance to join interstellar alliances centuries ago. At first, Earth was seen as a promising candidate, resourceful, innovative, and eager to prove itself. But when human mercenaries were hired by warring factions, things spiraled out of control. They brought destruction, the Valen leader said, his voice tinged with sadness. Entire planets burned because of their actions. They did not understand balance or restraint. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at Mia, who looked equally shaken. The pieces were starting to come together, but hearing it directly from another species made the weight of humanity's mistakes feel unbearable. Daniel crossed his arms, his expression hardening. So instead of teaching us, they just shut us out. That's not justice, it's punishment. The Valen tilted his head, as if considering Daniel's words. It was for protection, not only for others, but also for your kind. Humans, you carry chaos within you. Without guidance, you destroy yourselves and everything around you. Mia knelt beside the alien, her voice gentle. Is there any way to change that, to show we've grown? The Valen hesitated before answering. There is one group, the Eldari. They oversee the Accord and decide which species may join. If you wish to prove yourselves, you must face them. But beware, the Eldari do not forgive easily. As the conversation continued, Grace waited near the entrance of the shelter, her arms crossed and her foot tapping impatiently. She didn't trust the Valens, or anyone else for that matter, but she knew they couldn't stay here forever. We need to move, She whispered to Daniel when the discussion began to wind down. "This ship isn't safe, and neither are we." Daniel nodded reluctantly. Turning back to the Valens, he thanked them for sharing their knowledge and promised to help spread awareness about their plight. The leader handed him a small crystalline fragment similar to the one they already possessed. "Take this," he said. "It contains memories of our struggles. Perhaps it will guide you." With heavy hearts, the group returned to the Lucky Break. As the freighter pulled away from the derelict vessel, Ethan stared at the new crystal shard, its faint glow pulsing rhythmically. It was overwhelming to think that humanity's fate might depend on understanding these artifacts and proving they had changed. Back aboard the ship, tensions flared again. Grace paced the cockpit, visibly frustrated. "You realize this makes us bigger targets, right? Every step you take drags us deeper into danger." "She's right," Daniel admitted. "But we can't stop now. Not after what we've learned." Ethan clenched his fists. "We're close. I can feel it. If we can decode these crystals fully, maybe we'll find a way to contact the Eldari, or at least figure out what they want from us." Mia leaned against the wall, deep in thought. What if they're watching us already? What if everything we've done so far has been part of some test? Her word hung in the air, unanswered. None of them wanted to consider the possibility that they were being manipulated, but it was hard to ignore. The Galactic Accord wasn't just a set of rules. It was enforced by beings far more advanced than anyone could comprehend. Hours passed as they reviewed the data stored in the crystals. Images of ancient battles flickered before their eyes, showing countless species fighting for survival. In every scene, humans were conspicuously absent, not as allies, but as aggressors whose presence only worsened conflicts. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "This changes nothing. We still have to try. Humanity deserves a second chance, even if we have to fight for it." Grace raised an eyebrow. "You keep saying we. Don't drag me into your idealistic crusade. I'm here because Harper asked me to be. And I'm asking you to stick around," Daniel said firmly. "Because whether you like it or not, you're part of this now." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Grace sighed, shaking her head. "Fine, but don't expect me to play hero." As the ship drifted through the vast emptiness of space, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led toward something greater and more dangerous than any of them could imagine. Back on Earth, Rachel Monroe was growing increasingly frustrated. Her operatives had failed to capture Ethan, Mia, and Daniel, and now reports were coming in about their encounter with the Valen refugees. The council chambers buzzed with tension as she slammed her fist on the table during an emergency meeting. "They're getting closer to the truth," she snapped, glaring at her advisors. "If word gets out about humanity's past, or worse, the Eldari, we'll lose control of everything." Harold, the nervous advisor, cleared his throat. "What do you suggest we do? Send more agents?" "No," Rachel said sharply. "We need to act smarter, not harder. The public can't know about this, so we'll give them a different story. A threat from outside forces, aliens attacking our borders, endangering our colonies. That'll justify increased surveillance and militarization, while keeping everyone distracted." Jacob Lee, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room, felt his stomach churn. He knew exactly what Rachel was planning, fear-mongering to tighten the Council's grip on humanity. It was unethical, but stopping her wouldn't be easy. Still, he couldn't stand by and let her manipulate the entire population. Later that evening, Jacob sat alone in his office, staring at classified documents detailing Rachel's scheme. His hands trembled as he uploaded copies to a secure external drive. If he leaked this information to the media, it could expose the Council's corruption, but it would also put his life at risk. After a long moment of hesitation, he made up his mind. Humanity deserved to know the truth, even if it came at a cost. Meanwhile, aboard the Lucky Break, the group continued analyzing the crystals. Ethan and Mia worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of alien history and decoding symbols that hinted at the Eldari's role in enforcing the Galactic Accord. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that these overseers weren't just passive observers. They actively intervened whenever civilizations threatened galactic stability. Grace watched them from the cockpit, her expression unreadable. She wasn't thrilled about being dragged deeper into their mission, but she couldn't deny the significance of what they were doing. When Daniel joined her, she spoke without looking at him. "You really think this is going to work? Confronting beings like the Eldari?" "We don't have a choice," Daniel replied. "If we want answers, and a chance for humanity to redeem itself, this is the only way." Grace sighed. "Just promise me one thing. If things go sideways, I'm taking my ship and leaving. I didn't sign up to die for your cause." "You won't have to," Daniel assured her, though he wasn't entirely convinced himself. As days turned into weeks, the group grew closer to pinpointing the location of the Eldari. Using coordinates embedded in the crystals, they charted a course toward a distant star system shrouded in mystery. Along the way, they encountered strange phenomena: fields of glowing energy, gravitational anomalies, and eerie silence where stars should have been visible. It felt like the universe itself was testing them. One night, as Ethan reviewed the data, he noticed something unusual. Buried within the crystal's memory banks was a message, not in alien language, but in human text. It read, "Prove yourselves worthy." Mia leaned over his shoulder, her eyes widening. "What does that mean?" "I think it's a challenge," Ethan said slowly. "The Eldari aren't going to hand us anything. We'll have to earn their trust, if they even exist." Daniel nodded grimly. "Then we'd better be ready. Whatever happens next, it won't be easy." Unbeknownst to them, Rachel Monroe's plan was already unfolding on Earth. News outlets began broadcasting alarming stories about alien threats, sparking panic among the population. Military recruitment surged, and calls for unity against external enemies drowned out dissenting voices. Jacob's leaked documents hadn't surfaced yet, leaving the Council free to manipulate public opinion. As the divide between truth and deception widened, Ethan and his companions pushed forward, determined to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. But with the Eldari waiting, and the Council closing in, their journey was far from over. The star system they approached was unlike anything Ethan, Mia, or Daniel had ever seen. The light from its central sun shimmered with an otherworldly glow, casting strange hues across the void of space. Planets orbited in perfect harmony, their surfaces smooth and metallic, reflecting the eerie luminescence. It was beautiful, but also unnerving, as if the entire system was alive and watching them. Grace kept her hand steady on the controls, her voice calm but tinged with unease. "We're entering uncharted territory now. If the Eldari are here, they'll know we've arrived." Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the viewport. "Let's hope they're willing to talk." As the lucky break moved closer to one of the planets, a sudden pulse of energy rippled through the ship. Lights flickered, and the engine sputtered before stabilizing. On the radar screen, a massive structure appeared. A colossal sphere hovering above the planet's surface, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change like liquid metal. "That must be it," Mia whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The Eldari's domain." Before anyone could respond, a deep, resonant voice echoed throughout the ship, not through speakers, but directly in their minds. "You have come far, children of Earth. Why do you seek us?" Ethan stepped forward instinctively, though he wasn't sure where to direct his words. "We're here to understand why humanity has been excluded from galactic affairs. We want to prove we've changed, that we deserve another chance." There was a long pause, heavy with silence. Then the voice spoke again, colder this time. "Your kind has caused great harm. You bring chaos wherever you go. Why should we trust you now?" Mia stepped beside Ethan, her tone pleading. "We know we've made mistakes, but we've learned from them. Please, give us a chance to show we can contribute, to coexist peacefully." The sphere began to glow brighter, bathing the ship in radiant light. Images flooded their minds. Scenes of destruction, wars sparked by human greed and recklessness, civilizations crumbling under the weight of conflict. The memories weren't just visual. They carried emotions, pain, and loss so profound it brought tears to their eyes. Daniel clenched his fists, struggling to stay composed. We're not denying our past. But punishing all of humanity for the actions of a few isn't justice. It's fear, and fear doesn't solve anything. The glowing intensified, and the voice returned, softer now. Fear protects, balance preserves. Your species is young, volatile. Yet, there is potential within you. Grace muttered under her breath. Potential. That's what they call trouble waiting to happen. Ignoring her, Ethan pressed on. If you guide us, if you help us understand how to live alongside others, we won't fail again. Let us earn our place. For a moment, it seemed like the sphere might reject them entirely. Then the light dimmed, and the voice spoke once more. You will be tested. Prove yourselves worthy, and your plea will be considered. Fail, and you will leave this place forever. Without warning, the ship was enveloped in a blinding flash of light. When it faded, they found themselves orbiting a desolate moon, its surface scarred by craters and ruins. A holographic projection appeared in the center of the cockpit, showing coordinates and instructions written in symbols they recognized from the crystals. They're giving us a task, Maya said, studying the projection. But what are we supposed to do? It's clear enough, Daniel replied grimly. We follow their rules, or we don't get another shot. As they prepared to land on the moon, none of them noticed the faint signal being transmitted from their ship back to Earth. Rachel Monroe received the transmission in her office, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. She turned to Harold, who stood nervously beside her desk. They'd led us straight to the Eldari. Now we finish this. Far away, Jacob Lee finally released the leaked documents to trusted journalists. He knew it wouldn't stop Rachel immediately, but it was the best he could do. As he watched the news break online, he whispered to himself, "Good luck, Ethan. You're going to need it." The moon's surface was barren and cold, its gray landscape stretching endlessly in every direction. Ethan, Mia, Daniel, and Grace stepped out of the lucky break, their boots crunching against the dusty ground. The air was silent except for the faint hum of their suits' life support systems. In front of them stood a massive stone archway covered in glowing runes, the starting point of the Eldari's test. "This feels like a bad idea," Grace muttered, adjusting her helmet. "What if this is just some elaborate trap?" "It's not a trap," Ethan said firmly, though his voice betrayed a hint of doubt. "It's our chance to prove humanity's worth." Mia nodded, clutching a small device that translated the runes into basic instructions. "We need to solve 3 challenges. Each one will show the Eldari whether we're ready to join galactic society, or if we're still too dangerous." With no other options, they moved forward under the archway. The first challenge awaited them in a cavern filled with shifting walls and narrow pathways. Symbols appeared on the walls as they walked, requiring them to choose paths based on principles like cooperation, patience, and restraint. Every wrong decision caused the walls to close in, forcing them to think carefully before acting. At one point, Daniel nearly triggered a collapse by rushing ahead, but Maya stopped him just in time. "Slow down," she snapped. "This isn't about speed. It's about proving we can work together." By the time they completed the first trial, they were exhausted but more united than ever. The second challenge took place in an open arena where holographic projections forced them to confront their own fears and doubts. For Ethan, it was the fear of failure. For Mia, the guilt of questioning her role in uncovering truths that put others in danger. Grace faced memories of losing her family, while Daniel relived the deaths of his comrades during his last mission. When the illusions faded, they emerged stronger, not because they had erased their fears, but because they had acknowledged them. The final challenge was the hardest, a simulated conflict involving multiple alien species. Their goal wasn't to win, but to mediate peace between warring factions, something humanity had historically failed at. For hours, they negotiated, argued, and compromised until finally, the simulation ended with a fragile truce. As the glowing runes dimmed, a soft voice echoed around them. "You have passed. Your actions demonstrate growth, but trust must be earned over time." Back aboard the Lucky Break, the group received confirmation from the Eldari. Humanity would remain under observation, but the Galactic Accord would loosen its restrictions slightly. It wasn't full inclusion, but it was a start. Meanwhile, on Earth, Jacob's leaked documents sparked outrage. Rachel Monroe's schemes unraveled as the public demanded accountability. Though humanity still had far to go, the seeds of change had been planted. As Ethan gazed at the stars through the ship's viewport, he felt a glimmer of hope. Humanity wasn't perfect, but maybe someday, future generations would look up at the night sky, not with longing or shame, but with pride.